All right, so welcome to Cantina. So we are a strategic design and technology agency transforming organizations' ability to innovate, grow, and deliver better digital products and services. So we do the full gamut of design to development for agencies that need consulting help. So what is design thinking? So it's a process that's going to encourage a solution-based approach to solving problems. And that's different than using a problem-based approach or an analytic scientific approach. So the solution-based is going to focus on moving forward with the understanding that there are unknowns of the problem still existing, and that's okay. Design thinking is iterative. You're going to work in small steps to achieve smaller goals. And this can be helpful in a big business because often you're under tight deadlines or you might have a long time waiting to get big budgets approved. So if you can work in small chunks, you might be able to get more done faster. And with these small goals, as they build up, they're going to accumulate to these larger goals. And this is going to be helpful when you have multiple departments working on several things. If you can all work on small pieces and work together towards some sort of goal, that can make life a little bit easier for you. Design thinking, it's going to encourage group thinking, expressive ideas, creative suggestions, and a no wrong approach methodology. What this basically means is in the beginning, you're going to take whatever ideas you can, no matter how simple or complex they might possibly be in building or the solution, and you're going to at least consider them. So there's no wrong ideas in this method. You can throw anything out. It's a literal time to brainstorm everything. There are no bad ideas. You'll see some people say there are 5 stages, 6 stages. I like to think that there are roughly 7 stages that go through this, and those consist of define, research, ideate, prototype, choose, implement, and learn. And although this is a stack list, you don't always go from define all the way through to learn. Sometimes you'll have to take a step back and repeat steps or repeat a process, and that's okay. That's just part of this process. All right, so I'll go through these steps, talk a little bit about them, and then talk about how we can apply them to our workshop time. So the first one is define, or you could also think of it as empathy a bit. So you want to define the actual problem, and you want to get everybody on board with what the actual problem is, especially in a large company where people might look at a statement of work or a JIRA ticket or something, and they might actually see 2 different problems there. So you want to define that within the group. You want to determine success factors or measurable goals, and you want those to be realistic. You don't want to have a goal that you're going to double your e-commerce sales in 3 months or something like that. That's probably unrealistic, that's just going to be unrealistic one. And then you want to define your customers or your users. You want to have an idea of who these people are that are affected by this problem. What are they doing? Are they paying customers? Are they internal users? Are they potential customers? Are they lost customers? And then this will help you go into the next step of research. And so here, you want to review the problem that you've all defined. So again, everybody's on the same page. You want to see if there's any previous history. Has anyone tried to solve this problem before, either in your organization or outside of your organization? Because a lot of times, in my experience so far with consulting over the past 8 years, every time I go into a place and I suggest something, there's always somebody that said, oh, we tried that X amount of years ago, it doesn't work. So then you can ask, well, why didn't it work? Why did it fail? Was it a budget issue? Was it a management issue? Was it out of scope? Was it the wrong solution at the time? So these details are something that you want to ask people that have either been there longer than you or people that go across different departments, managers, the older developers, designers, the full gamut. And then you want to take that information and then any other data you can find on this problem and try and get that as well. And so an example of this would be, even though we're going to do some graphical interface stuff here, you could also apply this process to actual processes. So say for example that when you do code, when you push it out to a QA environment, somebody has to manually deploy it. So you have to ask someone every time you do that to manually deploy code to a new server. and you're a team of 30 developers, and so everybody has to do it manually, and you're looking to fix this problem to save that poor DevOps person's time because they're burning 30, 40 hours a week with this, you could look for data on how do other companies handle this. Is this a case for continuous integration deployment? Why hasn't this already been fixed? Maybe in the past somebody researched it and it was too expensive at the time. All right, so now that you have it defined and researched, it's time for ideate, it's time for you to think. And for the workshop, I have the first 2 steps kind of already done for us so that we can get right to the fun stage. So this is where you're going to throw out any solution that you can think of. Excuse me. Any solution you can think of. Don't think of a solution as being too easy or one that's too complex. Many, many years ago, Amazon put underneath the checkout button, it was something like, you'll have time to review your cart. And the language was much more simplistic than that. But they saw a pain point where people weren't getting past that button. And so they put just a simple text saying that you're not buying it right now, you'll have time to review. And then the next year, there was something like $300 million was grossed, and that was attributed to that one line of text. So simple solutions can work. An example of fixing a process for our DevOps person, the ideas could be, implement CI/CD. Maybe they only do deploys at a certain time of the day, once a day. Maybe they only do it a couple times a week. Maybe you get rid of the DevOps person and you let just anybody push, as crazy as that potentially could be. It depends. And the criteria for which suggestions are going to advance to the next stage of prototyping, they're going to vary by your company, by the problem, by your resources of time, money. And then you could also use criteria of like easy to implement, the best user experience, the shortest path to victory. Is this a foundation building block that we need to get this other thing done? And so the criteria will be fluid based upon whatever your requirements are. Excuse me. So after you go through your ideation phase, hopefully today we're going to generate somewhere between like 10 and 20 ideas at least. You're going to take 1 to 3 or 4 of those and move them to a prototype phase. And that can be in whatever fidelity makes sense. So that could be as simple as sketching stuff out, which is what we'll probably do today, to an Envision workflow, to sketch mock-ups, to HTML and CSS prototype, to any sort of tool that you need to test that prototype. When you test it, you want to test it with the group that you've identified as the customer's users. If your user base is actual customers, then it may not make sense to test it with like internal employees and vice versa. So you want to get that prototype tested with actual users so that you can have beneficial feedback. And if you're not prototyping already or testing things at like these lower fidelities, then you're probably wasting money because it's much more expensive to build into production. And then if something goes into production and isn't the best it can be or is a bad experience and is failing, that's costing much, much more money than the couple $100 or even a couple $1,000 that you would have spent on the prototype. And if you have a prototype or multiple prototypes, if one or more of them are successful, then you can go ahead and implement that into your production plan. If none of them are successful, you can go back to the ideation stage. You can try building out one that you already have, or you can try more ideas and you can redo that ideation phase. So you don't necessarily have to go all the way back for it. But if you have one that's correct, then it's time to implement it. And you're going to build that into your product lifecycle. When you do this, set up some sort of data metric so that you can measure the solution to see if it's working. So based upon whatever your metrics were in the beginning, set up some way so that you can figure that out, whether it's through analytics or probably analytics or like Crazy Egg or your conversion rate, so that you can justify, yes, this feature increased by 2%, even though our goal was 4%. It was close, but no cigar. And finally, this one is what I consider like the most important, is learning from this. So at the end of it, and we'll do this in the workshop as well, is have a post-mortem with the group. So talk about the process, talk about how it went, talk about any of the data metrics that you've been able to collect so far. We want to talk about what went well, what didn't go well, what could you improve on next time. Do you need a bigger budget for the next one? Did this work really well with a small budget that you can bring that up the chain to somebody else? And most importantly, did this solution create or discover another problem that was previously unknown? So when you talk with users through prototyping, sometimes you'll discover this whole additional pain point that you don't know about, your team doesn't know about, customer support may not know about. So this, in my opinion, is like one of the most important steps. So why use this methodology? Why use this process? It's going to let you build smaller, easier, more manageable features, and it's going to break the cycle of building like big monolithic apps that go out on a full release day that's just like pure chaos running up to that. Has anyone had the pleasure of experiencing something like that? Where you do like the full site redesign for like 6 to 18 months, and then launch day is like 60-hour weeks, 80-hour weeks for a while. This lets you progressively build onto that so that each piece is getting better, so that you don't have that chaos. You don't push that giant work live and then nobody talks about it afterwards. All right, and a bunch of nice little bullet points. Reduce stress among staff because you don't have this huge monolithic thing to ship. You get a faster time to market because smaller pieces are easier to move. Higher conversion rates because you can keep implementing on how good those are. You begin to have empathy for your customers if you don't already, because you can understand their pain points. Better product performance through the iteration. Increased knowledge transfer among your departments and your team. And then you have the ability to sunset old features or technology, and you can start to talk about this thing that we support. Does anyone even use it? Is it a big moneymaker for us, or can we start to get rid of that and work on better features for our customers? All right, and so when you start this, it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to go and tell everybody to drop everything that they're doing and you're going to do this whole new process for this new feature. You can start small. I would recommend starting small, building in incremental steps over a series of sprints or months. And when you start, don't create just like a hypothetical, use an actual pain point. And when you bring that to a meeting, it's going to reduce a lot of the debate that you might have in a large meeting. Has anyone ever sat through like an hour or 90-minute meeting where people talk about hypothetical pain points instead of using like any real data to, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of head shakes, cool. Perfect. This can help with that because you can bring the actual pain point, or if someone suggests the hypothetical pain point, you can say, what does our data say? If you don't have any data, then you can use this process to set up data to track that pain point and see if it actually exists, if it's worth building through the whole thing. Does that make sense? This is like a quick, super fast run through. All right, awesome. Excuse me. So with that, we're going to, yeah.
So we, a lot of what you described sounds like what benefits we get from agile development, release every 2 weeks. Sorry, we're going to have people ask questions to the mic if you want. Great, so I'll start over. So we have a agile development process and we release every 2 weeks. And a lot of the benefits that you described from design thinking, I think we get as a result of that. But I guess, my particular problem is that, I'm a really good database and object designer, and people describe really hard things to me, and we build them, and they work perfectly well. And then my team says, man, that's freaking ugly, right? And, and then, so we kind of get it, get the really hard part working, and then, then we take like 2 sprints to make it more presentable. So I guess my question is, like, how would I, my developers are great, they're in Romania, and then I have like my customer-facing people here who would, I'd like to engage them more in sort of design thinking and getting more of a design up front. So like, how could we kind of take this sort of process and integrate it into what we already have?
Yeah, so if you're already building, or if you're already developing stuff that works, and the complaint is that it's ugly, per se, then I would say that the pain point is that it's ugly, and were your customers in this are actual customers, or are they stakeholders in the project?
Yeah, they're actual live customers. I mean, usually, well, a lot of times we are up against the gun, so we're implementing a feature that's really needed right away, and then it'll come out, and our internal team as well as actual customers will say, wow, this works really, really well, but it's just not very logically laid out from our perspective.
Yep. So there are a few things you do. You could like lighten the development load so that you have time to do design work with it. Or if that's not feasible, if you have to go back after it's already live and update the designs, then you would start with that as your problem. You would research why is this ugly? What is it about it that people don't like? Is it that UI or is it the UX? From that, you'd probably go into high fidelity mock-ups if it's the like visual design. If it's the UX, you'd probably go to wireframes, and then you'd test that with actual users to see what kind of feedback you get. And you'd probably be in that cycle for a little while before it came time to implement.
Yeah. So might it make sense, for example, to plan things over 2 sprints and have the first sprint be that the task is for our local team here to kind of ideate, go through design thinking, and come up with a visual approach, and then the second sprint is for the the team to actually implement it?
Yeah, that could totally work too if you're stuck on time like that. Absolutely.
Awesome. And I do have one other question, which is you mentioned a concept of actually getting a prototype out and having real people test it, and maybe really the customers and that kind of thing. And I think that's a great idea. My product management lead is, I'll be honest, he's a very old school guy. And he's like, anytime you suggest that the customer should help you with testing, he thinks that's sort of anathema to a good idea. And so I don't know, have you kind of, and I don't know, I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, but I don't know, have you kind of seen that resistance, and do you have any suggestions there?
Yeah, so actually, yes. So I think it is every dollar spent on user testing saves roughly like $10 on, is it 100? It's that much? Saves $100 then on development costs. So if you brought up, all right, this user testing is going to cost $2,500, but we're going to save $250,000 basically, if not more or less. Like that's usually a pretty good metric to start with. The second one that I've seen help a lot is inviting the skeptics to the user testing groups. So I had a client, or I worked on a project last year where several of the developers didn't want to do user testing. They weren't interested in it. And we did it through WebEx because that's what that's what that company used, that's what their clients already used. And so we invited the skeptics to the user testing. And we did user testing every week. By the 4th week, those skeptics were then requesting us to put their stuff through user testing because they wanted to be validated by the feedback, because they saw how well and important it actually worked. Because a lot of their assumptions about how people use stuff was clearly proven wrong, and they were enlightened by that.